Hello, I'm Caroline Leake, and this is the on-record portion of the Roberts Report. I'm here today with Buena Vista Police Chief Keith Hartman. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
You're from New York, and you moved to Virginia to be police chief in Newport News, right?
No, I started in Newport News in 1992 as a patrolman, and I worked my way up through the ranks of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain. And when I retired from Newport News, that's what I was, a captain in charge of about 100 officers.
Okay. Now, what made you decide to make the move to Virginia?
That's an interesting question. Nobody really asked me that before. I grew up in New York City, lived on Long Island for 10 years, and I always had a burning desire to be a police officer. And back in those days, there was no internet or any type of communication through the computers. And so I used to get a booklet every month of where the police job openings were. And when I saw that one that was interesting and within driving distance of my house on Long Island, I would take that test. And Newport News was one of the ones that I took, and I was successful at, and they were the first one to hire me. So that's actually how I ended up in Virginia.
And how was the change from New York to Virginia?
The change is night and day. You can't imagine how hectic and busy New York City is compared to a smaller city like Newport News was. So it was a cultural change for me, for sure, coming from the north, coming down to the south.
What were some of the differences that you noticed in when you were a cop on the streets of Newport News compared to just being in Brooklyn?
Well, I used to take the subway from my house to go to high school into Manhattan, and from Brooklyn to Manhattan when I was 12, 13 years old. I used to do that on my own. So the whole culture has changed, where society has changed as well. You can't do those things that I did growing up in the 70s, 60s, and 70s in Brooklyn that you can do now. You have to be much more careful. And not that my parents didn't watch out for me or care where I was doing, but they were confident that when they put me on the train in the morning, I was going to get to where I was supposed to get to unharmed. So it's just a different world now.
When you moved from Newport News to Buena Vista, what were some of the goals you had?
For the last few years of my policing life, I wanted to be a chief of police somewhere. I was fortunate enough to be able to retire from Newport News because they have a different retirement system than Buena Vista does. So I actually retired with 26 years of service from Newport News when I came here. So I was looking for maybe a smaller, slower paced type of community, one that likes their police officers and police department. And so those are the type of things that I was looking to do. And of course, it was a huge cultural change, just coming from Brooklyn to Virginia, and then coming from Newport News to here. In the last 25 years or so, I've had a lot of cultural change in my life. Slower, everything's gotten a little slower paced for me, which is okay.
Now, what were some of the challenges in addition to cultural changes that you've encountered in Buena Vista?
Well, coming from a bigger police department, you had a lot more people working for you. As I said earlier, I had up to 100 officers and detectives and civilians that worked for me in Newport News. When I got to Buena Vista, I had 15 people that worked for me. And even when I got there, we were even less than that because we had a couple of vacancies that we had to fill. So I think there was about 12 or 13 officers that actually worked every day there. And so we took the first 6 months or so to ramp that back up to get our numbers back up to full staffing. So that was a challenge, trying to find qualified people to hire that actually wanted to do the job.
What do you look for in your police officers? What's the most important quality?
I think the most important quality is honesty. If you can't trust them, what they tell you that they've done or what they're going to do, then they don't need to be a police officer. Because at nighttime when I'm home in bed, I need to trust that person out there to be doing the right thing. On weekends when I'm not there and when the other staff is not there, you need to be able to trust those 2 or 3 people that are out there that they are doing the right thing the right way. And so far I've not had any issues. I trust all our guys impeccably.
That's great. Now, what is your management philosophy for running your department?
When possible, I like to have a participative organization where we all have a little input as to what goes on. But there are times when you have to be the boss and whatever decision you make is yours and you have to own it. So it all depends on the circumstance. Let's say we're looking for a grant. We all get together and figure out what type of grant we're going to get and what we're going to spend the money on and how to best use the funds. If there's a guy on the street at the park with a gun menacing people, well, that's not a time for participative leadership. That's this is where you need to go, and you need to go, and you need to handle this, and you need to handle that. So it all depends on the situation.
Now, you talked about funding. Have you gotten to get funding for things like body cams? That's been something that on national news they've discussed a lot. Have you brought that to Buena Vista?
Buena Vista is the only department in our region that has body cameras. We put them on the street back in January. We actually purchased those through a grant through Department of Motor Vehicle. We're very fortunate and lucky to get grants the way we do in our little city, and it offsets a good portion of our budget. So we like when we see grants come up. But yes, we bought the cameras through the grants, and I think they've been well received and pretty successful out on the street. They've helped us solve cases, collect evidence. Our demeanor complaints have gone down because the guys are on the camera. They know they're on the camera, so they're going to be a little more well behaved when they talk to citizens. And people that do complain on our officers, we've had the opportunity to go back and look at the cameras and say, no, the officer didn't say what you said he said. So it squashes a lot of complaints for us too.
How are the officers trained to use them?
Well, it's on-the-job training, and it's not a very hard function. It's sort of a push a button and to turn it on and push the button to turn it off.
Well, I was just wondering, when do they turn it on?
On every single citizen interaction. So whether it's
Okay.
a traffic stop or it's a domestic or just a casual conversation on the street, they wouldn't turn it on. But if it's a call for service, it's either self-initiated or one that's dispatched, they would turn it on. They're required to turn it on. And actually there's a 30-second buffer in there, so it's always running. And so it captures the first 30 seconds of whatever you're doing, whether it's driving or engaging in a conversation. So you don't miss that critical part before you remember to turn it on.
Okay. Now, with recent protests, like in Charlottesville a few weeks ago, do you think Buena Vista will face anything like that?
I personally don't think we're going to have those type of issues, but as a region, I think we all need to be prepared to step in and help. Let's say Lexington, one of their parades, they needed assistance. We would be there to help them. And we've actually purchased some riot equipment to be prepared for that, and we're going to do some riot control training because nobody in this area is prepared for that except for the state police. So we need to as a group. And all of us together, we have about 60 officers and deputies in this area. So that we would be the first responders for something like that.
What are some specific ways that you're training your police officers to handle riots like that?
Well, we really haven't had any training yet, and that's the unfortunate part. The state police is going to come in the next few weeks, and we're all going to get together, the three departments, Lexington, the sheriff's office, and our department are going to get together and do some training so that if an incident does happen, we will be prepared.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been Buena Vista Police Chief Keith Hartman for the On Record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Caroline Leak.